Republicans.
Lost their way,
Okay. Democrats.
captivated by socialism.
Okay. Climate change or global warming.
The new religion for the secular socialists.
Okay. Donald Trump.
A ranting buffoon.
Hillary Clinton.
Ethically challenged narcissist.
Trade unions.
Responsible for the destruction of manufacturing in this country.
Indeed. Europe.
Sadly, they have slipped into socialism and they are paying a very big price for that. Congress no longer does anything meaningful. Their fights are over inconsequential things. So, you know, I might wish there were a relevant Congress, but now mostly they're irrelevant.
Good. Thank
We have an immigration policy that is absolutely upside down. 90% of our immigration comes in at the low end economically, where we have a great glut of workers. And when the liberals wring their hands about minimum wage, the reason our minimum wage is a problem is that we have too many workers at minimum skill, and that's what's causing the problem. Yet our immigration keeps making that system worse. We ought to flip that 90% to go 90% the other way to bring in the skills we need, doctors and engineers. Exactly. We train students, including graduate students, and then we don't give them visas and we send them back home. And now our immigration system tends to emphasize families. And so once you have a base here at the low skill level, then their family members are likely also to be at the low skill levels. And we give most of the priority to family members. The liberal mindset basically believes that government is a force for good. In spite of world history, where powerful government has rarely been a force for good. In fact, mostly they've been a force for mischief. And I think if you look back through any country at any time, the times when government did bad things stand out far more than when government did good things. In fact, when government does good things, it's because it creates an environment and then leaves the people alone to pursue their lives and happiness on their own. It's when government begins to intrude that they create mischief. But when I talk to liberals, they tend to believe that government's a force for good in spite of all the historical evidence to the contrary. We are a great country because our private sector basically has kicked ass everywhere. You know, we have just far, far, far outperformed anybody else's private sector. And it gets back to the fundamental premise that we have over time generally had a government that was receptive towards capitalism, so a government that was mostly benign towards our private sector. And we have this incredible ability to assimilate that no other country has been able to touch. And therefore we can gather in the greatest talent around the world and put them in our businesses, and then our businesses can just crush everybody. I mean, capitalism always gets attacked, you know, it goes up and down. We're at a particularly bad place, but it's just, you know, a convenient scapegoat, particularly our financial system. Our financial system has been truly demonized, yet one of the reasons, perhaps the biggest single reason, that we are by far the world's greatest economic superpower is because we have the greatest capital markets in the world. By far. No one's close.
Would you ever consider running for political office?
No.
And why not?
I don't think you can believe in speaking your mind truthfully and honestly and want to run for office. I think that anybody who runs for office has to put together a coalition of groups, and to put together that coalition, you have to adopt their views or they won't become part of your coalition. So I think you have to compromise whatever values or principles you have in order to move forward. I'm also, the most important principle to me is capitalism, and everything else is way, way, way down the list. And that's not a popular stand with either Republicans or Democrats right now.
No.
It's fabulous because the point he makes is that people choose their tribe by emotional intelligence.
Right.
And emotional intelligence is best exemplified by abortion.
Right.
And I will still maintain that if I ask anybody out there what their views on abortion are, I can tell you what their views on every other subject are. from
Right.
there. And it is because your emotional brain chooses your tribe.
Right.
And then once you're in the tribe, things that require a rational brain, a logical brain like capitalism, that's too much work for people.
Right.
So they will simply adopt.
What does my tribe
that.
say?
What does the tribe say? And particularly where a lot of the anti-abortion comes from evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
And those people typically are not well positioned to understand capitalism or its principles. Yet Southern evangelicals are some of the most right-wing people you get.
All right.
So one has to conclude they probably didn't arrive there through their own logical process. They probably just adopted the
party
belief
line.
of the tribe.
Right. Right. That's
Hey, how about going back to only property landowners can vote?
that's not gonna-
But we're not going to go back there. So the reality is that we're going to, these are the people that, can con the voters into thinking there's something worthwhile there.
If you could go back to that, would that be a good thing to go back to? I mean, remember the
Every
reason
now
why
and
they
then
had that
somebody
rule.
floats the idea that your number of votes ought to be proportional to the amount of taxes you pay.
Right.
Do I think we'd end up with a great country that way? Absolutely. Do I think there's a chance of that happening? Absolutely not. If it were up to me, there would be some kind of test to vote, but every time there's even the slightest barrier to voting, which there's almost none in this country, the Democrats go crazy. Because a lot of what the Democrats are trying to do
Because
is
they're
to
part of the benefits
convince
from that policy.
convince the tuned out, unknown, know nothing people to vote for them. So their goal is to get as many of those people,
Yeah.
the politically apathetic, to the poll and voting Democrat. And the politically apathetic are the most likely to be swayed by the siren song of socialism.
Right.
And since we're speaking frankly, you've got to get rid of employer-based healthcare. We've got to go. Frankly, if I were to do it, I would go the whole distance to single payer. Even beyond that, I would have the government provide health care like a VA for everybody.
Right.
So these are government-owned hospitals, government employees that provide it. However, like charter schools, people who wanted to opt out of the system could opt out and get a voucher for avoided cost in the
Right.
system and go buy into a private system.
Right.
Well, I would eliminate the corporate income tax. I would go to value-added tax. I would eliminate income tax on people below $100,000. Totally. No income tax, no payroll tax, no
Right.
nothing. But what we really need is a value-added tax. I
Right.
mean, that's supported in economic theory.
Yeah.
It's supported in every way imaginable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Except
agree.
it's not what we do and we can't bring ourselves to do it. The real thing is that the Democrats have conned individuals into believing that corporations pay the tax
Yeah.
and that they're not paying
Yeah,
it.
very
They don't
silly.
realize corporations don't pay anything. Corporation is a pass-through legal
Yeah.
entity.
Yeah.
That the people pay the tax can only be the workers, the customers, or the shareholders.
Right.
Those are the only three people who really pay the corporate income
Yeah.
tax. Well, if you put in a value-added tax, it'll be the same three
Yeah.
paying it.
Yeah. But it's
People could argue that a French cafe society is better, where you work little and mostly you just sit around and drink coffee in the morning and beer in the evening with your friends.
Right.
That's not my life. I
Right.
think a lot of Americans, and certainly a lot of people in the Silicon Valley, want to have far more meaning, want to have far more value added, make far more contribution
right.
than just thinking that walking the boulevards is what life is all about. There are two things that have killed countries everywhere and always. That's socialism and corruption. And the worst of all worlds is when you have both.
Mm.
An idealistic socialist government when in reality they're just kleptocrats. I think that the turn towards socialism that we've seen in the West, in Japan, is really destroying opportunity for a lot of young people. And I think that whereas we have been able to watch over the past few generations, opportunities for young people get better and better and better, it's not going to happen now. It's not happening now. Their opportunities, in fact, are getting worse. Particularly in Europe and Japan, where job security, the strength of unions, the ossification of the system means that people who are in the system are doing pretty well, but they're locked in and they're keeping everyone else out. You know? I'm 100% a believer in charter schools. Charter schools do a better job in poor neighborhoods. That our schools have failed in those neighborhoods. You can argue whether it's the teachers, the system, the students themselves, whatever reason it is, they're a disaster. And the only way you can deal with something that's that much of a disaster is to get rid of it. If I could choose, I would contract with Mexico to run our prisons. And I'd just take all of the long-termers and I'd send them down to Mexico. It'd be far cheaper. Let them, hang around down there, let them be subjected to Mexican prisons, and I'll bet that would help a lot. One can look at slavery and say, yes, at a personal level, it was terrible for the ones who were captured and brought over here. We didn't do a lot of the capturing, other people did, but we were the reason they were captured. But by the way, the Africans who were here are far better off than the ones who were still in Africa. So in a sense, they ought to thank their ancestors for the incredible sacrifice they made to come over here. I mean, they didn't do it voluntarily, but it's why they get to live this kind of life instead of the kind of life you see in any city you visit in Africa.
Right.
That you need government to make the rules of the road and enforce the rules of the road, but not a government that begins to take away our freedoms. We ought to view freedom to start a business the same way do you need a license to start a religion?
Right.
No, you can just get a few guys and go
Rock
pray
and roll.
together.
Right.
Why do you need a license to start a business?
Yeah.
No, I just think that there is nothing as important in this country or in the world as capitalism, because capitalism and freedom go hand in glove. I mean, they're made for each other, and you can't have one without the other in either direction, I think.